fishing industry sustains many Arctic livelihoods, but rapid environmental changes are affecting fish populations. To ensure sustainable research management, communication from researchers to policymakers and fishing companies must be swift and direct.
Empowering indigenous communities in all aspects will strengthen our collective global response to the challenges of the changing Arctic.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to our second big picture session where we focus on strategies for regional capacity. Regional capacity isn't just a buzzword or a catchphrase. It's about survival, about how we build resilience and the right frameworks to tackle the many challenges facing the peoples of the Arctic today with often limited resources and often also limited control. One thing that came through in our first big picture session today was the need to collaborate and build trust. And the question for us here today is, how do we do it? One truth that also came out was a practical one, that top-down solutions never work if they ignore those on the ground. The question is, can we revisit organizational frameworks to truly benefit the people of the Arctic across all sectors and communities beyond paying mere lip service? And what about the next generation? Arctic youth are inheriting, you might say, a future that is quite uncertain. They aren't just future leaders. In many respects, they are today's leaders. Are we giving them enough tools and the right platforms to shape the future, or are we sidelining their voices in favor of outdated systems? We will have a youth representative here on stage with us, perhaps even more in our two panel discussions. So, before we begin, how can Arctic nations strengthen cooperation and scale up their capacities? In this session, we'll be looking at this from policy and structural changes to the building of human capacity. And let me mention that it would be wonderful if you could send us many of your thoughts and questions through the Arctic Frontiers app. This way I don't end up monopolizing the conversation. So do send us your thoughts, and I will come to them somewhere in the middle of our discussions. This way we can make the conversation as inclusive as we possibly can. So let's begin by inviting our first set of panelists onto the stage. They are, in many ways, decision makers and obviously key stakeholders. Please welcome Cecilia Mørseth, Minister of Trade and Industry of Norway. Also welcome Karen Elleman, Secretary General of the Nordic Council of Ministers. José Enrique Garcilaso, Deputy Head of Division and Head of the Regional and Rural Policy Unit at the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And Marie-Louise Ronmark, Mayor of Umeå in Sweden. Welcome to you all. So let's start the discussion with Cecilia Mørseth, if I may. You are Minister of Trade, as I just mentioned, and Industry of Norway, but you're also someone who lived here in Tromsø, which is very much...
I actually live here now.
Oh, you still live in Tromsø?
Yeah, I work in Oslo and all over the country, but I live here. So this is my home, and it's going to be my home, I hope, and maybe forever.
So give us your perspective about the issue at hand, both from a policy perspective, but also from a first-hand personal experience.
Well, I believe that when I started with politics, I didn't know it was. I was just quite young, living in one of the smallest fjords in Troms, and I had a lot to say that I wanted to say. And the youth engagement is so extremely important, and that has been an important thing for me the whole time, how to make the communities good places to stay and to come back. So I believe we have to, of course, have a lot of different business opportunities, because attractive jobs is quite important, but you also have to have a place to stay. You need to have the ability to go around between places, and you need culture, and you need education, and you need to know that you will get the help you need when it comes to health. So how do we make these small and bigger communities good places to live is the most important question for me, and I think we can address that in everything we actually do, because that is one of the most important things also as a politician.
So let me ask you specifically, how do you incentivize the younger generation to stay? Because we know, and surveys have been showing us that a lot of the younger people within the various communities have been leaving for better opportunities, especially women, interestingly, because they are the ones who go ahead and gain higher education in many of these communities. So how challenging does it make it for you to find the skilled labor that is needed?
That is one of my main concern, also for the future for northern part of Norway, is that we're going to need people who doesn't have. But the most important thing we maybe have decided is to build a University of Tromsø here in Tromsø. That means we also have the University Hospital, and this makes it possible to give us skilled workers who take their education not only here in Tromsø, but all over the northern part of Norway. They spend a lot of time all over the northern part of Norway. So we have to keep that in mind. Education is really important. And it would be good if you move to northern part of Norway, if you are a guy or girl and you meet someone from here and you understand that, then you have to stay. So that is the main goal for the government as well. Meet someone, fall in love, get children, and you know.
So long-term incentives to keep people here, to keep them engaged and not in search of other opportunities. Karen Ellemann, Secretary General of the Nordic Council of Ministers and a former Danish politician and Member of Parliament. How do you view the perspective that you just heard now when you look at it from your own vantage point? How do you build that community-first approach to the issue of building capacity?
Well, I think it's very important to focus at something that is really a cornerstone. You said it already in your introduction. I've been saying it ever since I arrived, and I say it all the time. But it's because it's not a given thing. But in the core of everything we talk about is trust, our Nordic gold, and building societies on this very strong democratic model that we have built everything we have around us upon is something that needs to be nurtured all the time. And that's when the minister is also giving these examples of making sure that people thrive where they live. And thriving is many things. It's, of course, a job, a stable economy, but also, leisure activities, sports, culture, and building this regional capacity of thriving lives is also a matter of building resilience. So, I mean, it sounds very basic, but it's very difficult, and it really takes a lot of work. And it starts, I mean, in our educational model all around our Nordic countries, it's in the basic editorial system that you are educated in becoming an engaged citizen. You are engaged already in the student council at the very beginning. It's something you train, it's something you learn, but it needs to keep on all through your lifetime, because if you're not an engaged citizen, and if you have a feeling that everyone else around me is making all the decisions, I'm not involved, then thriving is going down. So this local activities is more than having a job.
But how much does it depend on governments setting not just the right tone, but implementing some of these very noble and lofty ideas that we often hear them express? As a former politician, I hope you won't mind me saying that quite often we hear a lot of talk, but we need...
It's not lofty ideas.
We need to see action, right? Implementation of these ideas.
But that's why it's not lofty ideas. And when a state government is putting it in place, it's also grabbed locally. We have a mayor here in the panel. I mean, this is something that is grabbed and practiced locally and regionally. And it needs to be that. It's not just something we say in a speech, it's what we actually do. We have within the Nordic Council of Ministers, we've just launched our 10th Arctic program. And that's all about cooperation, and it's also, of course, about making sure that there is some kind of funding for organizations, for NGOs, for civil society, to make those kinds of activities that inspire, and that you have different kinds of communities, so your everyday life has a content that gives you a purpose.
You mentioned funding, which also means, the prioritization that is given by governments. Can Nordic countries increase their internal resilience and capacity when they are facing a multitude of multifaceted threats and security challenges, as we heard earlier today? José Enrique Garcilaso, as someone who works within the OECD, the issue of funding is something that often comes up. And, you look at the world's key trends, from demographic change to digitalization, climate change, migration, aging societies, and so on. How do all of these impact the Arctic region and its unique landscape? And how do you bring enough funding and investment where it matters?
Easy question. Just this morning we had a launch of this report that we're going to be presenting. It's called the NSPA. And I think this report shows the importance of collaboration, especially in places like the NSPA where it lacks density, and sort of like the good things that we see are producing productivity and wealth. And when you are remote and far away from markets, you can overcome those challenges, but you need to work together. You need to use digital and innovative and creative solutions to make up for that. And part of the report shows that there are many areas of cooperation, but you need to do it in an effective way. Something quite interesting, we hear, this place, like many others, is losing population. Population is aging, but so is most societies. Within the OECD, about 9 countries are already aging in terms of the overall. Remote regions, about 40%. Regions that are close to small cities, about 57% are already shrinking in terms of the overall population size. So it's not a problem only for the NSPA. And something that is important to understand is how to mobilize, how to go through these trends in a strategic and a smart way. So we talk a lot about shrinking smartly. It doesn't mean that because you're shrinking, it means that you are doomed for lower quality of life, but you can still deliver good quality of life even if you're shrinking. That means you need to come up with more innovative solutions. You need to take advantage of economies of scale, economies of scope. You need to do things maybe in a different way, and you need to be more anticipatory, thinking about what are the future opportunities that not just digitalization, but also climate change, and there's a lot of them in this part of the house. So back to your initial question about funding. We think that funding is important, but it's not the only solution. It's smart investments too. So we go to many places. They tell us we need more money. We need we have challenges. But the question here is, how do you mobilize the asset in a smart way? How do you combine public with private funding? How do you do it in terms of joint funding programs? How do you build scale amongst all the players? Because the challenges are very common. So.
But they're very common, but is there a problem of too often generalizing the problems? And we end up speaking in generalities and in many ways platitudes as well, unless we look at very specific problems that need to be tackled and the funding mechanisms that are needed. So does the OECD have the political will, the courage to do things differently? You talk about creative solutions, innovative ways of doing things. Or will they continue to apply this sort of one-size-fits-all solutions that have too often failed many of the Arctic's communities?
What was interesting about this morning's discussion was that the challenges are common, but the solutions need to be different. Each place, each territory needs to come up with their own tailored specific solutions. And here it's interesting that if you go too small, you get fragmentation of the investment and the funding. So there needs to be differentiation, but we need to think about scale. And that's something very, very important. At what geographic scale do you joint the efforts or you deliver services? For that, we always think that one-size-fits-all solutions don't work. But back to your first question, you need to get engagement. You need to get this bottom-up. You need to get this vitality of the communities. And for that, you need to allow them to develop their own visions, their own aspirations, but also give them the tools. And that's where your funding comes into question now.
Mayor Ronmark, are they being given the tools? Are you seeing this willingness to really get more meaningful engagement from communities that have long been sidelined?
I think that the local leaders, they are the architects to build the sustainable house. And that means that if you are talking about green transition, for example, it's not only about that, the industrial way of changing, it's also about sustainability for the social questions, sustainability of the economy, culture, and also ecological sustainability. Because if there are some problems, the municipality is the first responder. So I can give you different examples, but we had, you know, the Nobel Prize winner, a woman, naturally. She has been researching in my city, Umeå, for 7 years. And she's born in France and now working globally, but sitting in Germany. And I was talking to her about her experience being in Umeå. And that is Charpentier, the gene scissor, you know that? Mm-hmm. And she said, yeah, I like to be in Umeå. Yeah. Do you know why? Because you're very open-minded. You have put a lot of money for culture. And if you are talking about innovation and new products and the people want to stay or going out, coming back, it's all about to be more open-minded. Because if you're not open-minded, I was in a national board of innovation and we saw some industrial big on the stock market, and we saw that no innovation for several years, and I can't tell you who they are, but still we asked them, can we put a person to help you as a leader to say yes for 9 times, and then the 10 times, if you don't understand it, that is a good way to develop the industry, then you can say no.
Okay, and are you seeing enough promising initiatives being developed that are being discussed, implemented, and is there enough cooperation with other local governments? Because as mayors, you're really being entrusted by communities.
Yes, we are always cooperating. And now I think it's necessary to move on the cooperation in the Arctic areas. I was last week in Ukraine, and I think the Arctic area has been on the spot for decades, and we have to know that. And we have been talking the whole day about cooperation, but I think we need to talk as well about co-creation, because co-creation is a little bit more than cooperation. So I'm in the board of Arctic Mayors Forum, and I think it's necessary that you hear the voice of the local municipalities on the national and international level, because we have to be together. Otherwise, there will be nothing about innovations. So it's just a message.
Karen Ellerman, how do you connect, the local to the national, the regional, when you think about collaboration?
What do I think about collaboration?
How do you connect these dots?
It's
when it comes
the
to
most
collaboration?
important. And I really also like your your way of saying co-creation as well, creating those arenas where it can actually happen. And when we have various programs, we have, for instance, and I mentioned the Arctic program, which is of course based here in the Arctic, for the Arctic, but connecting the dots and making sure that what comes out of these projects, I think you said it well, with the effect of different initiatives, because these are projects and initiatives with public funding. So there's an obligation here. When we spend public money on different initiatives, I think we are obliged also to kind of harvest the results. So we get inspired, so we share the knowledge, so this can be done maybe in another place with another local twist to it. But having a forum like the Arctic Mayors Forum is an extremely important forum for cooperation, but also for connecting the dots, getting inspired. And you can only have these kinds of conversations when you have the basic built-in trust that we're actually interested in each other, interested in knowing what kind of, problems you're dealing with and what kinds of solutions you're getting up to. And I love some of the concrete examples that you are sharing, where you're actually also engaging a lot with the youth community, asking, what do you think about these ideas, or how would you tackle this problem? So this is all about engagement, involvement, and also really listening to each other, and listening to each other in a safe environment where you're actually around the table for the greater good for all participants.
How much listening is going on at the government level, Minister, would you say? Because some critics might argue that economic strategies often, prioritize profit over capacity building at the local level.
Well, how much listening? I think it depends on who you ask. But I would say we listen a lot. And it's quite important to listen before you act, so you know what is the right solution. But when it comes to the Arctic and the Arctic way of living, it's not an easy answer what to do. I believe I was the chair of the County Council. Last report was made by the OECD in 2016 or something. 2016, yeah. Yeah. So that is also really important work, because we in the government do a lot. That's quite important and affects everyone's living here. But so does policies made by the regional governments and the local governments, and we have to have the same path, the same goals. We have to have some saying of where do we go from here. Yeah. And we do have a lot of possibilities, because we of course can come with some kind of fundings for take innovation, for an example. I believe that if something works in the Arctic, it can work everywhere. And that should be something to hang high when you're a young student, smart people, if you work in healthcare, or with space tech, as you do here in Tromsø, or tourism, or on food from the ocean. If it works here, it can work everywhere. That's a quite great business idea. So you should move here to the northern part of Norway or Sweden or Finland or the Arctic if you have good ideas, and engage with the universities and the businesses. And we need to have some kind of hope that we can get this going, because everyone is we are going to live longer, all of us, and that's a good thing. But it has some challenges as well. But then we need innovation, we need technology, and we need all of those things.
And these challenges makes you more resilient in many respects. So if you can make it here, as you say, you can make it anywhere.
Yeah, you can make it everywhere.
Let's take a question from... Please go ahead, and then I'll take a question from the phone.
I will give you another example from... we have in the industrial design, the university has been the winner in the world for 8 years. One of the, I used to go to and talk with the students, and one of the students has a special project because she had a grandma who has gotten stroke. She was looking in the industrial design, what are we doing with a patient? And she moved it away in another way of thinking, because it's also humanity inside. So she asked the doctors, and she asked the whole organization, and they changed it. She was young, she was thinking outside the box.
And flipping the script.
Exactly.
So let's take this question. The question reads, we hear a lot about the importance of engagement of the public, quote unquote. What are we looking for? People voting in national elections, people emailing politicians, people joining political parties, posting on Facebook. How do we measure this engagement in a meaningful way? Karen.
The first part of the question is yes, 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 yes.
Yeah.
I mean, because of course it's being engaged, and that means voting. How about running for office? How about taking a turn and then raising your hand? That's a problem right now, because I'm quite sure that every single political party here in our Nordic region can tell stories about how they kind of tap someone's shoulder, someone who might be a member of the party but who's maybe not willing to run for it, because suddenly this business of being in charge has changed a lot in the years, due to social media, due to a lot of things.
How do you incentivize people to run and take up this challenge?
By education, by making sure that we are all democratically raised, and that it starts in the school. It starts with the student board. It starts with this kind of engagement. And of course, our political systems with the local governments and parliaments, of course, the parliamentary system with political parties. But political parties are suffering and bleeding members. There are not many people who are actually becoming members of the political parties, and some of them are running without being members of the political parties. So this engagement through these well-known, old-style systems that we have with the organizations, with the political parties, that's still the way to go. But innovation in our political models is something I know that several, if not all, maybe you can say more about that, but if not all political parties are struggling. How do we kind of reinvent the idea of actually being engaged in politics?
Well, let's ask you. How did you get engaged? How easy or difficult
I
was it for
started
you?
when I was 10. Wanted to run for something in the school. Had something, but I think I heard some kind of an irritation in that question as well. Irritated the person who wrote the question. Because I believe that one of my main concerns now when it comes to engaging more people into politics is you are asked to have really easy, quick answer to really complex problems. And that's not possible. And I believe that it's quite really hard to be, especially local politicians. I see that. I see people who run one time, and after their 4-year terms, they quit. And why is that? Because the world isn't easy, but it's possible to do a lot of things when you run for office. But we need new people, more people, young people to actually engage in the politics.
But you understand some of the frustration
Yeah.
of younger people who have lost faith in many public institutions, in governments, because again, they're often promised a lot, but we don't see actual results and
Well,
implementation.
I think that sometimes people are promised quick solutions on things that can't be solved quickly. And that is a problem. We maybe need to be more honest when we talk about politics.
Do we need other new political parties, someone is asking?
Well, we have a lot of political parties in
enough of
Norway,
them.
so I think it's I think
Do we
it's
need
enough.
to reform them?
That you have to reform the parties, yes, because now earlier you spend all of your time in your political party. You took your kids into meetings. I was one of those kids. So it's a part of your life in a different way than it's now. So you don't have the time because there are so many things to do in your everyday life. So the political parties are just something that you are engaged in if you are really, really, really interested. And that I hope should change. But then we need new ideas to how to engage new and more people.
How does it look to you?
It's a fascinating discussion, but I do think there's a need for inspiration and give opportunities. I think the young, a lot of the responses must come from the young, and I think there's also a problem of disengagement, and we've seen it in other countries where the inequalities have increased over the last years. We've seen the global financial crisis, we've seen the COVID, we've seen Russia's and the energy crisis. And when we look at the spatial distribution, a lot of these inequalities are between the big cities and the remote rural places. So I think there's a lot of disengaged people in these remote places. For example, with the Netherlands, we have the farmers' crisis. We did a whole event about this discontent. And a lot of this discontent is because many of the new opportunities are not triggering down. And I think there's a disengagement by these communities that the national level or capitals are not listening and understanding what their needs are.
Capitals and big cities, are they listening? Mayor?
I think we have to know that when I started to be interested, it was about Vietnam War, what was happening with the people. At that time, we didn't have a lot of pictures on the television or in the smartphone and so on. Today, I know that the young people are very, very frustrated what is happening around in the world. So keep the people and ask the question. Don't give the answer, because if you always give the answer, they think they don't. I take another way of being political, because it could be in different ways to be a political person. So I think in what we can hear now around in the world, the word, not the world, the word, what you explain can be very, very hard, can be very threatful, but it could also give hope. We had an author in Sweden called Strindberg. He's not live yet, but Strindberg, he was talking about what that means. So the answer is be open-minded. Culture is a very good way of open up the mind for the people, for the young people. We had, for instance, 700 pop band in the cellar. They were playing and like that. And they are on the scene around the world nowadays. But you have to promote it. So my city, we are putting money for culture, mostly in Sweden. The most money goes from our city to culture, and that means a start of the democracy as well.
There's one thing that we haven't touched on, which is this notion of societal stability and cohesion, and the fact that many of the younger communities, those who don't have enough economic opportunities, who feel the need to leave, may be more prone to being vulnerable to cyber threats. We know there have been examples in northern Norway. I wonder if you could speak to that when you talk about building capacity, human capacity. Any takers?
I'm sorry.
You know, the idea of sort of building the societal cohesion to make sure that communities across the Arctic aren't prone and vulnerable to the hybrid threats that we've come to hear about in some regions. Karen, is that something you want to talk to?
I'm not quite sure if I get your question right, but let me give it a try, because discussing resilience and the thriving in local communities, it is vulnerable if people are dissatisfied, not feeling psychologically safe, or getting caught into the internet. And I mean, we have tons of examples, both in our Nordic region, globally, of misinformation, disinformation, really creating instability.
Yes.
And that's a threat. And how do we face that threat?
How do you protect against it?
And how do we, well, I would also say educate against it, and really make sure that it's not really getting out of hand. I would come with maybe just 2 concrete examples. A free press. The whole necessity of your work and your colleagues' work, which is the serious news coverage.
Yeah.
And where does a majority of mainly younger people get their news stories from today?
Social media.
Social media. And social media, you can not only say social media as being something bad. No, you cannot. But you can look into the numbers and saying it's worrying that we still might have the same number of journalists, but the hits and the news and the clicks is just evolving. So your work of actually delivering sane news and combating fake news, misinformation, disinformation is key. And you're not alone, because I think, and it's very clear that governments, at least here in the Nordic countries, are actually contributing a lot to the different organizations, fact-finding organizations. That's a very concrete example of how we combat misinformation, disinformation, and again, the educational path. And then,
and it's
let's
a challenge
face
for
it,
everyone.
It's a challenge for everyone. And I think that you at the editorial sides, you also carry a big responsibility, because covering politics in many ways has become entertainment.
Yeah.
It's not entertainment. No. Politics is extremely difficult work, and that's why the coverage of politics, I'm not a politician anymore, and it's not because I didn't like it, but it's just because I saw an ad in the paper for this job, and I really wanted this job, and I was lucky to get it. But it's really close to my heart, that idea that it's really important that politics is not entertainment. And I said it in an earlier debate, but we have to respect and be fair to our politicians, and not just have a hard talk where it's about who's the winner and who's the loser. Right. Get some facts there, and let's make sure that the viewers make up their own opinion.
In many ways, social media democratizing our access to news, but on the other hand, we know, and studies have shown, in fact, researchers at MIT in the United States came up with a research a couple of years ago that showed that fake news travels 6 times faster than real news. But having said that, how do we control that flow? But hold your thought, Mayor, if you could. I want to just throw out to all of you a couple of questions from the audience, and perhaps you can take them and give me your final thoughts about how we move forward and build resilience and capacity. So one of the 2 questions is this. Many people who are moving to the countryside in Nordic countries are foreign nationals who may not feel comfortable with the local language but would like to be more active in their new community. How can we make sure everyone feels invited to speak, even the new people within our communities? And second, are there any strategies to face the problem of engaging youth to the regional needs? So, let's begin with you, Mayor.
In my city, we are talking 150 different languages. And I used to say that is the best thing what has happened to our city. Because the people have get into my city with new songs, music, dance, and so on. And also new food and new restaurants and new innovation. Emmanuelle Charpentier, she's a Nobel Prize winner. So we have everything there. So I think I used to go for, when they have the special days for some countries, they have singing and dancing and firing. I used to be with them. Because it's no problem for a city. It's just a positive way of open up our minds.
So your recommendations to governments, what would be your recommendations, just in a word or two?
Be open-minded, because they are giving you influence which you couldn't have otherwise.
Your thoughts?
Well, a couple of thoughts. One, about the migrants and the youth. I think it's about giving opportunities, and many places they need migrants. I think the perceptions are changing nowadays quite a bit. I think on the matter of trust that we mentioned before in social media, data and evidence is very important. It's very important to educate the youth that because you hear something, it doesn't mean the truth. And I have 2 small daughters, and every time they come with news to me, I always ask them, where is your source?
Instagram.
I think we need to
TikTok,
also...
sorry, TikTok.
No, but even if they get it on Instagram and TikTok, they need to go beyond that.
Yeah.
They need to verify that whatever they're hearing is actually from a trustworthy source. So I think it has to do a lot with educating the new generation that because there's so much information, so much noise, they need to channel and find out which is the good information and which is the bad. You cannot just be taking everything as granted. And I think that also requires some changes in our educational system. Okay. And then finally on the trust, I do think that we talked a lot about trust, but I think it's also trust across levels of government. I think that's very important that there's trust. We talk about partnerships between local, regional, and national, and EU. So there's much more that I can say on that, but I'll just leave it with that.
Okay. Anything you want to add, Karen? And I'd like to end with the Minister.
I think you've said it all, and I'll give the floor to the Minister.
Last word.
Okay, the youth, the young people. Next year, 2026, Tromsø is going to be the European Youth Capital. And then we have a whole year to address a lot of important questions. And let me just say, we have to take the young voices seriously, also when we disagree. And we have to explain why we disagree, if we disagree. And we have to tell them if we are actually think they have good ideas as well. So my final thought is we have to take the young people who want to stay here, who want to make these smart ideas, who can make our lives better, and we have to take them seriously. So I am really looking forward to also the next year here in Tromsø.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed to all of our panelists. And on this note, taking the young voices seriously. Here's a quick look now at some of these young voices, 200 Arctic emerging leaders coming together for the first time at the Arctic Emerging Conference. I hope I got it right.
I met them earlier today.
Let's have a look.
Taking care of that community going forward.
My name is Julia Jabai, and I am co-chair of the Northwest Territories Climate Change Youth Council. To me, a resilient Arctic looks like healthy communities. Communities where people are connected to themselves, each other, and the land.
To me, a resilient Arctic looks like self-sufficiency. It's an Arctic that can provide for its own needs, that's not reliant on southern places for their energy, for their communication, for their food. It's an Arctic that can provide all those things for their citizens. That's a stronger Arctic.
Angang kaniya sakta cooking, Hinkujalaska Ilana Kakta Cooking. Hello, my name is Brandon McIntyre. I'm a Nunna Nupik and I'm a youth rep for ALU International. When I think about the most needed investments into youth education and engagement, I think along with scholarships and funding for students, I think mentorship programs that help build confidence in these students, both career-wise and academically, are very, very helpful.
Arctic communities can become better at involving their young leaders by providing platforms for young leaders to become involved and receive mentorship through others in their communities.
The youth are not only the leader of the future, we are the leaders right here and now. We need to start trusting and have confidence in the youth and giving them the confidence boost they need to be the leaders that we need in the future. So I hope that we can work towards a better future where we can see more young leaders.
So the Youth Arctic Conference, and a lot of the recurrent themes that we have been hearing, the importance of involving young leaders, providing platforms, the need to start trusting in the youth. All right, so let's delve more into all of this and see how we can involve the youth and actually take them more seriously in terms of factoring in their ideas. Let me call on all of our panelists to join me on stage. First, Dr. Camilla Stoltenberg, CEO of NORSE, the Norwegian Research Center. She's also a adjunct professor at the University of Bergen. Viljo Vuorimäki, Viljo, student representative of the U-Arctic Board and member of the Norwegian Chairship Youth Committee under the Arctic Council. Claire Shaw, co-founder of Borealis and investor relations director at Unite America. And last but not least, Dan Gull, president of Solvest, Northern Canada's largest renewable energy company. Welcome to you all. Dr. Camilla, let's begin with you. Innovation, research, very much the things that you do on a daily basis in terms of providing that critical tool needed to strengthen cooperation between the private and public sectors here in the Arctic. Where is it most needed, and how does it contribute directly to solving some of the challenges?
Well, I actually think it's needed almost everywhere in the sense that although we do have research and innovation, we now have a geopolitical situation which is a threat but also an opportunity. And it's an opportunity for the Arctic because I think the Arctic is so crucial for security and for climate and environment, and potentially also economically in a much stronger sense than we've seen recently. And those things go together. And I think we could look at what Mario Draghi has said in his report to the European Commission. It wasn't about the Arctic, but it was about how EU needs to step up to be more competitive, but EU needs to do it rapidly and in a wiser, smarter way than what we've been doing recently. We need to combine our different goals. And one goal is security, another goal is welfare and democracy, and a third goal is the zero-emission society. And then competitiveness is meant to serve all those goals together. Now, I think the Arctic can play a much more important role in doing so. And then we need research on those components. I mean, climate and environment, security, and security in the broad sense, covering everything from research that is directly about how to protect ourselves, I mean about military aspects of society, but also on a broader societal security issue and preparedness in a broad sense. So research along all those three dimensions of security is important, and to continue the research on climate and environment is important, but in order to do so, we also need to do the societal part of the research, how to maintain and develop our democracies, how to develop our regional and local communities.
By putting so much emphasis, though, on research, but research within the security sphere, are we losing sight of the role of science, innovation, and research in other fields and how it could strengthen cooperation amongst peoples in the Arctic?
I think that can happen, but I think the opposite can happen as well. And that is dependent on how we manage those threats, because there will be research that is oriented towards the Arctic, which is about defense, security, and preparedness, but the Arctic and the people of the Arctic should be involved and take a regional role in that in order to combine it with all those other goals that we have for our societies.
Are people being involved?
Unless we do that, there will be others who do it.
Vidya, are you, as a representative of the Arctic youth, are you comfortable, confident that you are being involved enough in the decision-making, in the emphasis of current research frameworks that go into security and defense and the rest of it? Or do you feel that you need to be taken more seriously?
I think it's very important to emphasize when we talk about Arctic youth how big of a diverse set we're talking here. Myself, being from Finland, I do not represent every single individual living in the Arctic. We have a vast amount of Arctic youth facing different kinds of issues in the Arctic. So it's very difficult to, I think it's a little a dangerous side of simplifying it with one individual. I can only give up on my opinion on the matter, and I definitely think that the youth are not enough listened when it comes to decision making in the Arctic. I think I'll just shamelessly advertise the Arctic Youth Conference, of course, but it provided an excellent place for youth collaboration at a very good level, and I think it was the start of something quite beautiful in the Arctic. But still, it was between the Arctic youth, so it was only the beginning. What we need is that this conference becomes an interaction between political decision makers in the Arctic and the youth themselves. We had the great opportunity of having our last workshop involving Arctic parliamentarians with us, and this created a magnificent moment where active youth in the Arctic and those political decision makers were able to exchange ideas and come up with possible solutions to the matters that the youth are facing in the Arctic. I think it's also about building up structures where youth are heavily involved in. It has to become self-evident that the youth are involved in that political decision-making. At the moment, the youth are kind of seen as an advisory board of some sort in some governments and organizations. I think the youth should have a significant role in the positions in those structures. In addition, though giving the space for youth to actually gain experience provides them with better knowledge and enables the next generations, including the one after mine, to be better prepared for those positions. And that requires, the big word that's being used as well, is trust between decision makers and the youth themselves.
So listening to you, I mean, I understand that, although the youth are participating in some kind of solution-driven platforms and mechanisms, they are still speaking amongst themselves. Is there still a sense within, the meeting that you attended and the many people you spoke with, was there a sense that the youth remain, to a certain extent, passive recipients of solutions that are designed in faraway, distant boardrooms and capitals? And how do you change that?
I think it's about being taken seriously, in a sense. It's both sides. There's the youth side, and then there's the people listening to the youth. When it comes to the people listening to the youth, it's an attitude that needs to be changed. It's this idea of what it means to be young and the youth. Most of the time, people that are in the higher-ups will define youth as inexperienced, and that's the connection they make straight away, so they're kind of, we don't need to listen to the youth. Well, they give the youth themselves an immense amount of expertise on matters because they see it beforehand. I think one of the best examples is Indigenous youth. I live in Rovaniemi, in Finland. I do not experience the same effects of climate change as the Indigenous youth in the Arctic. So having them connect with researchers and then making research that can affect policy making in the Arctic is an effective way of making an actual change. But between the decision makers and the youth has to be kind of a transaction relation where the decision makers see the youth as a benefit to the policy making, and that the youth then gain knowledge and experience so that it becomes this exponential growth for youth.
Claire Shaw, how do you view this from a different vantage point as someone who originally is from Alaska? You have deep experience in Alaskan politics. What lessons have you learned from working with community leaders there, with the youth, with the Indigenous communities?
I appreciate you saying that you're not speaking for the entire Arctic youth, but it's wonderful to get your perspective on it. And I think a lot of these topics that have come up in the panels so far at this conference, they're so intertwined, and especially the need for, I think, some audacious, really long-term thinking, and that requires that we think about what are the futures that we're creating for people your age and the next generation that comes afterward. And that means tying good economic prospects and good jobs to the education that we're providing those young people now. And that requires a lot of listening, and it requires, I think, a lot of deliberate invitation to young people, and to especially young people in remote and rural and Indigenous communities, to understand what the needs are that they're experiencing, what futures they're trying to create and that they want, and how we marry those with people who are in positions of power to co-create them together.
You know, how crucial are they to the innovative frameworks that need to be put in place?
I think very much so. They're everything. We have...
I mean, in your experience, how much do you rely on the ideas that come from the younger communities?
Very much so. A program that I'm putting together to launch in Alaska later this year that is designed to attract young talent to come to the state is entirely contingent upon making sure that the experiences we're crafting are the things that young people want. There are certainly notions that people have about what living in Alaska or living in the Arctic is like. Some of that is bears. Some of that is, being able to experience all of the beautiful and rich kind of wildlife and outdoor experiences that we have to offer. And that means listening to the interests and demands of the people that we're hoping to provide this experience for, and making sure that things that they want to see, which is getting involved with a richer understanding of Indigenous culture, Indigenous history, Indigenous people, what it means to live and work in Alaska, that we are crafting an experience that really meets those desires.
And Dan Gül, give us also a sense of your own expertise and personal experience as someone who has worked on projects that have directly impacted the unique needs of Arctic communities. I'm thinking about sustainable energy solutions that you've worked on. They are touted as the future of Arctic resilience. How can they act as a catalyst for the capacity building and increased resilience that we're speaking about?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, thank you for having us on this platform, and specifically a shout out to the Emerging Leaders Program. That's why I'm actually here today. So obviously without that and without Global Affair Canada, I wouldn't be here. So appreciate that. So just a visual representation for you, for those of you that haven't been to Northern Canada. There's 10 provinces in the lower south, and there's 3 territories. If those 3 territories represented their own country, it would be the 7th largest country in the world. And it would have about double the population of Tromsø. So I'm a visual guy. So the Sahara Desert has 9 times more population density than Northern Canada does. Okay, so when we're talking about Northern Canada, we're talking about the Arctic in general. We're talking about huge, vast, expansive amounts of land. And there's a lot of remote, rural, specifically Indigenous communities that call that home. And so, to your question about renewable energy development and deployment specifically in Northern Canada, there's usually just 1 or 2 utilities that operates an entire territory. And so all of that revenue gets generated and gets exported. Instead, when you are able to develop renewable energy systems that are owned by the Indigenous First Nations, Inuit, the Métis, the DevCorps of those communities, you're keeping that revenue within the community. And obviously, when you have money in the community, that then goes to education programs, it goes to more infrastructure, it goes to better mental health initiatives, all these things. So you start fostering this almost snowball effect, right? Where instead of kind of extracting resources and revenue from that community, you're fostering that within the community itself.
But let's be honest, though, how do you balance between profitability with the pressing needs of the wider community, especially those living in remote areas, for equitable access to some of these resources?
That's a good question. So, how do you balance that? First and foremost, I think that the renewable energy sector is a new space, right? And financial institutions, traditional banking institutions, are still trying to figure out how to do their own risk analysis on these projects. And so it's heavily reliant on federal, on territorial funding, and on the communities themselves wanting that solution. And there's a saying that, you know, when you've been to one Indigenous community, you've been to just that, one Indigenous community. And why I emphasize that is when I go into a community and try to collaborate with them in developing a renewable energy project, it might not be their first and foremost priority for that community. They might be suffering with food insecurity, with, you know, clean water access, all these other things. So I think, you know, we have to switch our kind of Western approach to, I know what's best and this has to happen, to, okay, what does this actual community want? And, you know, there's a lot of communities in Alaska, in northern Canada, Indigenous communities that have minerals and natural resources like oil and gas that they want to extract, right? And so it's not my place, or truthfully anyone in this room's place, to make that call to say, well, no, we're transitioning away from this stuff and you can't financially benefit and your people can't financially benefit.
They have the first-hand knowledge.
Yeah,
right,
absolutely.
That needs to be factored in.
Yeah.
A couple of questions from the audience. Let's see. What actions need to happen now or are happening now that help support youth to be active in their communities, which includes youth who are not typically active who are silent or marginalized? So what actions need to happen or are beginning to happen? Dr. Kivela, do you want to
Are you
take
asking
this
me?
one? Why not?
Well, I'm
And
not
then I'll
sure
ask
I'm
Video,
the
'cause he's the
best
more
one
obvious.
to answer that question, but I
what
think that if we're speaking about the Arctic as a whole, and I know it's enormously diverse, I think that, as I started out saying, although the reason why the Arctic now receives much more attention is sad, it's because it's threatened by different forces. There is an opportunity there, and that opportunity means that you need all the people that are there, because we really need people to live in the Arctic. So that is a way of at least motivating others for putting resources into those people who live there and making it more attractive to stay, both work-wise, education-wise, and family-wise. So I think that those investments may be easier to get, at least to parts of the Arctic, over the next few years to come than they have been recently. I'm not sure. I think it needs to be promoted politically from people in the Arctic, but that will also be important for young people in the Arctic.
Video, is enough being done for the Arctic, and how can young people within the Arctic do more for themselves?
I think it's important to also understand a diverse set of youth and what they face in the Arctic, because I think the way people and youth can affect decision-making depends a lot on the country's laws and the way they function themselves. The law in Finland, for example, universities mandates to have a three-system participation in the decision-making, having staff, professor, and student representation, even the board of the university. This is not the case in other countries of the world. So it's important to understand that it's important to ask the locals and the local youth on what matters are significant to them, and then approach them on a kind of a single basis, not to generalize the whole issue as in, we need to do this and this will resolve the whole youth involvement problem in the Arctic.
What do you make of the projects that we just heard about?
I think they're great. I think I've spoken beforehand. I think it's important investing into youth is providing them jobs. I think this is a significant portion. And this question about the vastness of the Arctic is, well, the Arctic Youth Conference had around 300 participants. All of them do not represent themselves a big percentage of the Arctic, because there's a lot of Arctic youth that are just living their common lives, and those are the people on how do you connect with them and ask them what they want. The activists oftentimes have an understanding of the complexity of the Arctic, but they might not. So how do you have this direct link with those youth? And also, how do you have a direct link with the decision makers that might not see youth as relevant as we might think? We've had the chance as a committee to meet tons of leaders, in a sense, wanting to listen on what the youth wants. But how do we connect with those that are not as interested? Because they will make the change as well. I think that's significant. And apart from other things, funding is essential. Everything resolves around the money, unfortunately, including the conference itself. Countries were able to fund participation from so many countries. I think it was a beautiful thing seeing so many people from so many countries connecting with each other, and that was possible made by the fundings. Youth most times do not have a career yet. Their income is based on working alongside their studies, which will help them survive the necessary amount of times they're studying. When it comes to studying also, I think it's important that the previous panel did talk about the importance of having youth activism. The current system in the university does not benefit people that are activists. In Finland, for example, your studies get delayed if you partake in student activism. I see that activism itself is invaluable experience for youth to become Arctic youth leaders. But the society itself does not revolve around that. There is this constant push for youth to be partaking in activism, but the tools are missing to make that happen itself. And this is change in what we consider in the university system. People in the 80s and 90s had more time to study. They had more funding from the university to study. Those are getting cut from the students. We're not providing the students the necessary tools to really succeed at their best.
So the tools are missing, the space is often missing, and so is the funding. We heard someone in our previous panel say that funding wasn't everything, but how do you improve funding opportunities to make sure that some of these projects come to light? And where do you see the role of businesses, especially startups, in building capacity in the North?
I think in many ways, one thing I did want to touch on as well with on the topic of politics is I think that one reason that youth may also be turned away from engaging is because, especially in the United States, the polarization is it's so dysfunctional. There's not much incentive to feel like if you are to get involved in politics or get engaged that your wishes will be heard, that anything will actually happen, that there's any utility in getting involved in that way. And Alaska has a lot of troubles. We share a lot of challenges with the other regions that are represented here. One thing that I think is quite special and unique, especially right now in the United States, is that we have bipartisan majorities in both chambers of the state legislature. You can see action being taken. The government at the state level is it's more functional, it's more cordial. I think that young people can look and see real opportunity and a future there for themselves to engage potentially as politicians or to be activists or to just take a greater role. You don't see that when you look at Congress at the federal level so often. But Alaska, I think that is a point of pride and something that we do have going for us.
But the Arctic identity in the US seems to be much less firm or obvious than it is here in the Nordic Arctic.
I agree. And
how do you change that?
I think it's to our detriment that that's the case. And I would love to see more engagement from young people, from young Alaskans in programs like this that can really foster more of that regional cooperation. That's not something that I felt as a young person growing up there. Felt much more American than part of a larger Arctic region. I think changing that is difficult, but again, an open invitation, a listening ear from groups like this that say, Alaskans matter, we're interested in our perspective, that goes a long way.
But how remote does Alaska still feel for most Americans, would you say?
Quite, yes. I think the most common refrain is being able to see Russia from our house. So there's a more realistic grounding that needs to take place first. I think the U.S. needs to see Alaska as an important state, and then Alaska needs to see ourselves as an important part of this region.
Famously Sarah Palin's words.
Indeed.
All these many years ago. Dangur, let's go for a question from the audience, which is for you. Where do you feel the opportunities lie between the Yukon and Alaska to grow more resilient together?
Together? Yeah, that's a good question. I think we're both experiencing some political shifts right now. Like we have, obviously, Justin Trudeau has officially resigned, and we'll be going through another election our own here. There's a lot of lessons learned, though, right? Northern Canada and rural, I'll say not northern, but there's about 230 remote communities that rely on diesel generation in Canada specifically. There's almost the equivalent amount in the state of Alaska. So we have a lot of similarities, obviously, in that sense. And we also have, you know, the Gwich'in that live both within Alaska and the Yukon. So we're talking about borders here at this conference. Well, there's Indigenous groups that don't have those traditional borders, right? And they have traditional hunting rights that they can go across and stuff into NWT and things like this. So, yeah, where do we learn from this? Where do we build capacity? You know, it's interesting being here. There's a lot more infrastructure and development. We do not have communities of 10,000 people at the 69th parallel in the north, in our north. And I think, you know, it comes down to, there's a Kevin Costner movie, I don't know if anyone's watched it, Field of Dreams, and the saying in it is, if you build it, they will come. Now, it's a baseball movie, but where I'm going with that is, I think if you build and invest in the infrastructure, if you build and invest in the community, you know, you focus on those different facets of health that people need, then you're going to have more healthy Arctic communities. You're going to have people want to go to those communities as well. And I've done a lot of hiring in my day. When I started at Solvest, we were 6 employees. We're now around 70 employees. And I love to use the term, sell the sizzle, not the sausage. So if you're trying to sell someone to come to experience a location, you don't just sell them on the byproduct, you sell them on the experience. What are they going to feel? What are they going to taste? What are they going to hear? What are they going to see? And that's really where you get people invested in the North and invested in the Arctic.
Speaking of investments, Dr. Camilla, back to the issue of funding, a question from the audience. How do we ensure that young people and innovators have access to funding? There's a lot of red tape, and the processes are often complex.
Yes, there is a lot of red tape, and the processes are complex. But again, I think that we have to, although to me it seems that this may differ again between the different parts of the Arctic, but I think, at least for Finland, Sweden, Norway, there is a feeling that we have new threats now that we are facing, and that directs attention towards the northern parts of our countries, at least.
What about the opportunities?
So the opportunity there is to have stronger collaboration, at least between the Nordic countries, but I think that could include all the Arctic, or all the countries or parts of the countries that are part of the Arctic, because those are shared, those threats. And that means that it might be easier, actually, to get both funding for research and innovation, but also for investments in the society than it has been, and with a more long-term perspective. But it does require mobilization regionally, and I also think it requires that one thinks about this as something one doesn't do only for that region, not sort of a closed box, but for the world that we want to live in. So it must have a broader and higher perspective, must include the whole nation. So I think by mobilizing people that do live in the northern parts of the Arctic parts of these countries, it will be possible to get funding, because there's a mutual and common interest in achieving the aims that is meant to achieve.
So how do we galvanize the youth? How do we mobilize
I don't think
all of
this
these
is only about
capacities?
youth. I think the young people. I think young people are essential in it.
Right.
But I think without young people, it can't be done. But I think it actually is about the whole society, and also involves people outside of the Arctic who have an interest in strengthening the Arctic.
Viljo, during a question from the audience here, during the, recent years, there have been talks in Iceland about lowering the voting age from 18 to 16. Would this be a way to make politicians take youth more seriously? So, essentially lowering the age, the voting age.
Voting age, yes, yeah. That's a great question, again. I think it's a complex answer, given that, again, it's not only dependent on the youth themselves. If we are able to teach the youth to have an impact on understanding how some diplomatic or political matters are handled, then officially, even if the older generation does not take them seriously, it doesn't really change anything. I don't think at the moment, if you're 16 or 18, there's already a generalization on what you consider someone being young. I'd say it can vary from 16 to 25 already. Lowering the voting age might shift a political system in one way or another, and then can build up possibilities for a future political structure that is more young-friendly, in a sense. I think at times there's this resonation where older generation think that, well, I had it hard, so I think the youth should deserve the same thing. I think that it can be related to anything. I think student loan program forgiveness, a lot of the arguments on why students should not get forgiven is, well, I had to do it myself, so why are they not suffering as much?
Do you think it's as cynical as that, or just
well,
oversight?
It is more complex, but one of the reasons is that once you grow older, you have to understand that you were once young yourself, and you have to provide the possibilities and opportunities that you wished you had, and otherwise there is no change culturally. So I think it's something that doesn't happen right away, and lowering the age of voting from 18 to 16 will not, well, change anything with a snap of fingers. You'll have to wait around 10 to 15 years on figuring out what are the political changes in those areas then.
Claire Shaw, as we talk about change, someone in the audience would like you to answer this. How do you change Alaska if Alaska doesn't want to change? Alaskans like to feel independent. Does the United States build upon it?
Oh, I feel so qualified to answer these questions.
So how do you change Alaska?
Well, it's true. I think that's a statistic that's noted frequently about Alaska is we have more people who are not affiliated with a political party or associate themselves as an independent than there are Democrats or Republicans. So we have hard-headed people. We are independent thinkers. I think Alaska will change because we have to. We are facing incredible challenges, those that have come up many times at this conference: climate change, geopolitical, changing security environments in the Arctic. The state is in a seriously precarious financial situation. We're so reliant on oil as our kind of single source of revenue and industry in the state, and that is absolutely not sustainable. So in a sense, we will be forced to evolve our approach to all of these things. At the same time, it's not just being forced to do that. We have these incredible opportunities to do so. We have renewable energy opportunities. We have a functioning state legislature. That's really special. Not everybody gets that. We have a new administration, and it's not exactly clear what will come with that, but even with much talk about Greenland, we know Trump is talking about changing the name of Denali, so he knows Alaska is round, and there was an executive order just on our state. So with his intentions on resource development, there will be a new focus on the state and what we'll do and what kind of future we want to have. So whether we are pushed or pulled, I think there is going to be a significant evolution in how the state sees itself very soon.
And of course, looking at the future of the region, of course, it's very much a collaboration between all stakeholders in the private and public sectors. Dan, what would you tell the policymakers, not necessarily here on the panel, but future maybe policymakers, but those we've heard from today, those who are here at the Arctic Frontiers Conference, what are they missing or not paying enough attention to?
Pertaining to the Arctic in general?
And about how to build that resilience.
What are they missing? I think that, we've thrown this kind of term around a bit, that decisions are being made in southern boardrooms. And I think that a lot of these policymakers have probably never visited the North or the Arctic in general. And so you have to understand that there's different priorities from a lot of different groups. And doing anything in the Arctic is more expensive. Logistically, we have human capacity constraints that we have to navigate as well. There's lots of communities where if you want to be working, you're working 5 different jobs because there's just that much opportunity. So,
what are the key barriers to funding from your perspective?
I would say just the urgency of the funding, right? So we work in a society that has a lot of red tape with our policies, and we don't have all this time to be navigating this red tape, and especially in an area of the world that Western society doesn't know as much about, right? We're doing all this research and we're trying to develop these infrastructure projects and renewable energy and the rest of it. You have to kind of pull away that red tape and realize that we can't do what we do in the South up in the North. That doesn't work. And so, yeah, just looking at it differently and trying to work towards the outcome and be a little more flexible on the path there.
Be more specific about the solutions.
Yeah.
While factoring in some of the success stories that can be adapted and adopted from one to the other. Dr. Camilla, a question from you, for you, again from the audience. We talk a lot about the need for more youth involvement, which is fantastic and clearly so important. However, we talk less about elders and the older generation. How can we ensure the North becomes a place where people see a future for themselves through all ages and health, and for a fulfilling life at all stages? And as someone who was formerly in the public health domain, I guess you could answer this as well.
We can't be certain that that will happen for any of us, whether we live in the Arctic or not. But I think, again, that it's been a struggle against very strong forces, centralizing, moving south, etc., for everyone who lives in the Arctic for many years. But I do think that the geopolitical situation, particularly that which pertains to security, does change opinions about in the South about the Arctic. And it does mean that the Arctic becomes more important for many more people than it has been for very long. It's been abstract, it's been something you know is important for us strategically, but now it's real, at least for many. That is an opportunity. We both have to work so that the threats don't materialize. That's incredibly important. And we must do that together. Not the people in the Arctic must mobilize themselves, but I mean they should definitely collaborate with others. It's not something that can be done in the Arctic alone. So that goes for all ages. And we're never certain that life will be good and easy throughout the life. Of course, it's not something that we're given at birth. It's something that we have to work for continuously.
And with the 5 minutes left, if I can get just your final thoughts, if you were to put this in a word or two.
Yeah, well, then I will return to research and innovation, which I think is a very important tool in order to achieve the aims that I believe that we have together, and that I believe that many of the people of the Arctic do have. And we should use this opportunity to strengthen that tool and to do it in more innovative ways, to collaborate with more commitment and with a more long-term perspective, not on just single sort of issues in research and innovation, but with larger, broader aims, so that we all know how to work together towards those aims.
Viljo, what is for you the key to seize this momentum?
Well, I think there's a few things. It's very difficult really simplifying into one phrase. But I really think the research and innovation part, I think when you say that, what comes to my mind is youth. I think youth collaboration in a pan-Arctic setting should be really celebrated and most importantly funded. I think that's very interesting and very important. Youth represent so much. I think what describes the youth is innovativeness, is really thinking outside the box. And I think those two keys are fundamental for any organization that is working in the Arctic. So I think I'm really asking kind of every organization that is partaking in side events or potential panels is to kind of stop for a second and identify your own structures and kind of go through them again and figure out ways how youth can be involved in those. And then activate the youth activism in there and provide the experience and education that you can then build upon your own government levels or organizations that may be in the Arctic.
And what is most urgently needed, the funding or the political space?
I would start with the political space. The funding comes along with it.
All right. Claire, to you and Dan, in fact, I'll throw at you a question from the audience to sort of wrap up. how do we build young, strong business leaders like both of you in the North? And what do you need? What tools do you need, Claire?
I think we need funding. And so I'll gladly take your checks. I'll be a good steward, I promise. We have challenges accessing capital in Alaska now. The federal government makes opportunities available, but there's a lot of red tape, there's a lot of bureaucracy, and there are wonderful kind of third-party nonprofits and other entity partners that are stepping in to act as bridge funders, and that gets funding to where it's needed, but it's awkward and it's not as direct as it could be. With a Department of Governmental Efficiency, we'll see if that speeds things up, I don't know. But to how to create great business leaders, invest in us, invest in the youth.
Yeah, I would build off that. I got to celebrate my birthday yesterday in Norway here, so I got to experience a traditional Norwegian birthday song and dance, which was awesome. So I'm 31 now, today, but that's an age that I don't disclose with a lot of people, right? I grow a beard on purpose.
We'll keep it between us.
Right? Don't post this. But I actively hide my age because when people see, oh, the president of the largest renewable energy, oh, that's pretty cool. But when they find out that I'm 31, I've experienced ageism in my life, in my professional career. So, how do we build business leaders, young advocates, and the rest of it? I think it comes down to mentorship. I think that everyone in this room, whatever age you are, you can probably think of individuals within your network that you could reach out to. You could grab coffee with. You could, share your insights and lessons learned. Funding as well. Our own company. There's a lot of solid funding opportunities for individuals under the age of 30 to work in the green sector in Canada. So that's allowed us to kind of step up our game. And yeah, the average age in our company is probably 29. So it's pretty proud to be a young company, innovative, but with the youth comes the energy as well. Yep. And you don't maybe have all of that lived in life experience, but just work through it and kind of practice forgiveness and don't beat yourself up.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday. Well, Vilio still beats you, the youngest on the panel. Can I reveal your age?
Yeah, sure.
24? Am I
23? Yeah.
All right, almost. But anyway, fantastic to hear your perspectives on the way forward. I'm not sure that we can actually offer all the funding needed, Anna, correct me if I'm wrong, at this conference, but there will be plenty of opportunities for networking, which I think will also go a long way, and to open up discussions with all of you, including the young Arctic leaders at the receptions tonight. I believe there's one or two of them. And I will see you back here tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. for another big picture session on the oceans. So I hope you'll all be here for that. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Meticulous work, removing layers of snow and fern before reaching the deeper, more stable layers of ice. Each layer of snow has its own chemistry and texture, summer snow differing from winter snow. The new ice core from northeast Greenland will provide an invaluable climate archive, including a 100,000-year-long history of changes in temperature and greenhouse gases trapped in the ancient snow. Observing deformation of the cores and boreholes will tell scientists more about the dynamics and motion of the ice. Deep down, these close to 3,000 meters of glacier ice shape a vertical timeline of past climates. But before revealing the secrets of the ice, a lot of preparations need to be done. The Greenland climate is harsh, but still, the temperature of the surface is too warm for the scientists to work on the ice cores without damaging them. To protect the ice cores from melting, they need to be analyzed and stored in large tunnels below the ground. Inflatable balloons, the size of a large bus, are dug down and covered with snow. After a few hours in the cold climate, the snow roof stabilizes and the balloons can be deflated. The researchers now have the perfect base for carrying out their work.